Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Rather than film an intro for this video, I just thought I would start right away because it is a very long video, so yeah, no sense in making it longer, telling you what I'm going to tell you in the video anyways. So Lydia came home from school a few weeks ago and said that she had a project that was going to be due in a few weeks, and she had to sculpt a 3D object. And she started talking about it, and she decided that she wanted to sculpt Toothless the dragon from How to Train Your Dragon. And so we started talking about different ways that she could do that, and we talked about some paper mache, and then somewhere along the lines it morphed into air dry clay. So we went to the store, we picked up a few tubs of air dry clay, and I started doing some research on the internet because I have never sculpted anything in my life. And so what I learned was that you can sculpt over top of something called an armature. And you can make an armature out of whatever you want. In our case, what we ended up making it out of was tinfoil. So we just wadded up pieces of tinfoil and then slowly started building those up. We used hot glue to connect them so that we didn't have, you know, them falling apart on us. And slowly started to mold our base for our sculpture, or our armature as it's called. And so yeah, we just took little pieces, kept, you know, squishing them into different shapes and making them. I decided that I didn't want to, you know, do too much on Lydia's sculpture, so I would do a Toothless right alongside her. And what we ended up deciding was to just sculpt his head, because trying to sculpt a head and body and wings and all that would have taken us a really long time. I'm really glad we made that decision because the head itself took us 3 full weekends. So I figured it would be a fun project to get everybody involved in. So Isaiah decided he wanted to sculpt a Squirtle Pokemon, and Rachel wanted to do a puppy. Her puppy has changed species a few times. So it started as a puppy, then it was a kitten, then it was a lion, then it was a saber-toothed tiger, then it was a regular tiger, and I think that's where we ended. Or it might be a lioness now. Either way, it's got 4 legs, a tail, a head, and ears. So, you know, it's a feline of some sort. And then she also wanted to make a Squirtle. So Garen is making the lioness, saber-tooth, puppy, kitten creature. And right now Rachel's working on her Squirtle. And yeah, so we're just kind of sculpting everything, and it was a lot of by guess and by gosh because, you know, none of us have done this before. So we were all pretty pleased with how it turned out, and yeah, I don't know that there's anything I would necessarily have done differently now that the project is finished. It went pretty smoothly. You know, one thing to be aware of when you're putting air dry clay over top of an armature is that as the clay dries, it's going to shrink. And so just be prepared to have some cracking. We had quite a bit of cracking on the Toothless heads, as well as the other little ones, but because they were smaller, there was obviously less cracking. But I just went in after they'd fully dried for a week and just took some more clay and wet down the cracks with a paintbrush, and then rolled out little tiny ropes of clay and pushed it down into the cracks and then smoothed it out, and then let that dry for a week, and it was fine. There were still some little cracks, but the little cracks we were able to fill in, or they basically disappeared when we started painting. So now we're just starting to cover the armatures with clay. The clay was a little bit dry and it wasn't sticking super well, so what we found was easiest was to kind of like wet our fingers a little bit and then put the clay on top, and that kind of just gave the clay just a little bit of extra stickiness to stick to the tinfoil. Don't add too much water, because if you do, it will just make for more cracking, because again, the more water you add, the more water needs to evaporate as the clay dries. Putting the clay on the ears and the horns was a little bit challenging because they weren't quite as sturdy as I would have liked. I mean, they were sturdy, they were well attached and whatever, but clay's heavy when it's wet. So I think next time I would probably have just some light gauge wire as well as the tinfoil, but it ended up being fine. They just drooped a little bit lower than I would have liked as they dried, but it still looks like Toothless in the end, so really it doesn't matter. As far as drying goes, what we ended up doing was the first weekend we made the tinfoil sculpture or tinfoil armature and then put the clay over as much of the surface as we could, and then we left that to dry, and then the following weekend was when we put the clay on the bottom and left that to dry for a week. When it came to connecting the top and the bottom, I just wet the part that had dried already and then wet the clay that I was working with and kind of like smoothed them together, and I haven't had any kind of an issue with it, you know, coming off or whatever. When I was fixing the cracks the following weekend, I had a few spots that kind of wanted to come loose, but again, I just added a little bit more water and a little bit more clay and it was fine. So now we are going to paint the sculptures. I don't have any footage from filling the cracks and doing the bottom because I was waiting for a phone call that day, and I film all of these on my phone, so that's just how that went. But I pretty much explained it all in the last clip. But now I had read that it's best to prime air dry clay before you paint it, just because it tends to soak up a lot of the paint and you don't want your paint, you know, not being dull after you paint it. So I had some leftover primer from when we painted our walls, so we just quickly went over our projects with the primer, and yeah, you know, white on white, it's not super exciting. So now I'm mixing my paints to actually paint Toothless. I didn't do anything fancy. These are acrylic paints from the dollar store. And I'm just mixing some black and some blue and some silver to kind of make like a dark navy grayish blue. I wanted to paint the whole thing with this color before I painted it black so that I could kind of give it some texture and dimension. I didn't want it to just be flat black. I do go over the dark navy color with black at the end, but I left some of the blue showing just to kind of like give it some shadow and highlight kind of a feel. I wasn't super technical about this because frankly painting stuff and coloring and realistically looking stuff is not my forte. Anytime that I've ever drawn anything, as soon as I add color, it drastically alters it, and not in a good way. So I was just kind of, you know, painting the blue and then just hoping that because I had included texture in the actual sculpture that the highlights and lowlights would just naturally pick up in all the right spots, which, you know, it ended up looking fine, guys. I'm looking at the finished product and I am very happy with how it turned out. So you could skip this step if you wanted or not. Either way, I'm sure it would look great. I did paint 2 coats of this bluish gray on the head before I did the black, just because, you know, they're cheap acrylic paints and I'm painting a dark color on white, so you definitely see some of the white showing through, and I wanted to make sure that I had full coverage. So I did 2 coats of this color and then a coat of black, and yeah, I think it turned out amazing. One of the final steps that I'm doing is I had some black sequins in different sizes as well as some very large black sparkles, and I'm just putting them on in kind of a random pattern, kind of trying to mimic the scales that I've seen in different pictures of Toothless, and you know, just to give it again more texture, more dimension, and just a little light catching color, just because I didn't want it to be completely flat. And because I don't have any kind of clear coat to put over top that isn't a matte clear, I didn't want these, you know, Toothless does have some sheen to him because he's a dragon and he's got scales. So yeah, I wanted to try to capture the essence of that, so we went with sequins and sparkles. Lydia also, when she finished hers, she used some very large rhinestones. They're like a black opalescence-y color that I got from Michael's. Gems, rhinestones, whatever you want to call them. You know, those plastic things that look like teardrops. And now Lydia's just finishing up hers. She's putting her final coat of black over top of the blue. Mine is upside down drying. I will say that if you're going to turn it upside down, make sure to have a cloth or something, because the first time I did that, it stuck to the container that it was on and it damaged the paint, so I had to touch it up. But this is the finished product. I am so happy with how these turned out. I mean, seriously, neither one of us have ever sculpted before, let alone done anything like this. So I couldn't be happier. Lydia's thrilled and can't wait to bring it to school on Friday. I honestly can't wait to hear what her teacher's feedback is, because I think she did a fantastic job. I am so pleased with how this turned out. And honestly, like, I know how little I helped her with this, and to see what she created, and she's 10 years old, I'm just one very proud mom over here. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing, and I will see you, well, talk to you again next time.